But even the Quran is vulnerable to change and distortion, if not in its original Arabic, then certainly in translation. The King Fahd printing press in Medina, Saudi Arabia has the capacity to publish 10 million Qurans a year in Arabic and 44 other languages. These are distributed around the world well below cost, and in some cases free of charge. And it's fascinating to see how the Saudi religious establishment has augmented the text. They have inserted in brackets, such as the Jews and such as the Christians, into verses that refer to people who have earned God's anger and gone astray, and into the verse calling upon the faithful to make their armaments ready against the enemies of Islam. The translator has made another insertion: tanks, planes, missiles, and artillery.
What you have got are modern armaments set within the Quran itself. And interesting enough, in the introduction to this, and it is by a notable leader in Saudi, you have a justification for violent conflict, jihad, for suicide bombing, and it is stated clearly that the Quran is the perfect model for warfare.
Any suggestion of distortion in the text is highly contentious, because of the special significance of the Quran in the minds of Muslims. Unlike most Christians and Jews who believe their sacred texts were authored by men inspired by God, Muslims believe the Quran is the Word of God as dictated to the Prophet Muhammad. This distinction means that critical analysis of the sacred texts becomes an extremely sensitive issue when applied to the Quran. And the problem is compounded when some of the scholars making the attempt are Western non-Muslims. Are they really in a position to shed new light on the text and its origins? In 1972, during the restoration of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, capital of North Yemen, workers discovered piles of old parchments in the loft between the inner and outer roofs. The entire load was stuffed into some 20 potato sacks, where it might have remained were it not for the arrival 7 years later of Dr. Gerd Puin, a German scholar and Quranic expert. Puin immediately grasped the significance of the find. Working with a team of local assistants, he carefully pried the layers apart and fired off thousands of photographs. 4 fragments immediately caught Puin's attention. They contained the first and last chapters of the Quran, and unlike any other Qurans in existence, they were illustrated with architectural drawings of mosques, a vital clue to their origin.
Because of its drawings, because of the art historical context, you can date this Quran very precisely to the time of Al-Walid. This is the reign between 705 and 715.
The oldest datable Quran in the world, created some 70 years after the death of the Prophet. From the potato sacks, Puin identified fragments from nearly 1,000 different Qurans. Comparisons between them and the standard Cairo text in use today are startling. These early texts are written in a kind of shorthand, with no vowel markings or distinguishing dots, which means that individual words can have up to 30 different meanings.
Es ist tatsächlich so, dass man durch die schiere Existenz,
the sheer existence of so many different possible readings would suggest that this text wasn't passed down word for word.
Der Text eben nicht wortwörtlich überliefert.
The text isn't as stable as it seems in the Cairo version.
In der Fassung von Kairo erscheint.
Muslim scholars today argue that the integrity of every word of the text has been perfectly preserved through the oral tradition. But the written Quran shows variation. Forensic examination of the Sana''s fragments revealed earlier texts that had been washed off and rewritten. Although the hidden text revealed no contradictory meanings, words had been changed, verses and whole chapters rearranged.
If his researches are correct, particularly on dating, it suggests in fact that the Quran was not a single product, a single entity that was fixed by 650, but actually developed much, much later, hence the overlaying of texts of written materials.
Suggestions that different versions of the Quran show any variation in word meanings and chapter arrangements are highly controversial in the Muslim world. A book written by an expert in early Semitic languages was so divisive that the author published under the pseudonym Christoph Luxemburg and will only speak on condition that his identity remains concealed.
Unbedingt erforderlich, den Koran neu zu lesen.
In order to understand it correctly, we need a fundamentally new interpretation and reading of the Quran.
Dr. Marcus Gross helped to translate the book from its original German into English and is willing openly to express the author's views.
A quarter or a fifth of the Quran contains words which have been misunderstood, or words which don't make real sense. That number can be vastly reduced with a knowledge of Syriac to, let's say, 5%.
Syriac, or Syro-Aramaic, had become one of the dominant languages of Christian liturgy by the 3rd century. Christ spoke Aramaic, and it can still be heard in remote Christian communities like this town of Malula in Syria. But at the time of Muhammad, Syro-Aramaic was the major written and cultural language of the whole region. Written Arabic was in its infancy. Muslim scholars of the past had the confidence to acknowledge foreign words in the Quran. In the 10th century, Al-Tabari, one of the most respected commentators, identified Hebrew, Latin, Greek, Persian, Abyssinian, and Syriac words. The difference, though, is that Luxemburg is claiming new meanings, and at a time when critical examination of the text is actively discouraged. How can one professor of linguistics challenge the collective judgment of more than 1 billion people? And on what basis?
Ich bin natürlich bemüht, zunächst einmal
I take into consideration the meaning of the root, of the corresponding root in Syriac, or a possible misreading. Misreading in this case means that the undotted text was dotted wrongly. Then there's also the possibility that a Syriac letter was by mistake written within an Arabic text.
Using these methods, Luxemburg examined some of the most obscure passages of the Quran. After Mary has given birth to Jesus, in the Arabic Quran, the angel says to her, "Be not sad, your Lord has placed a rivulet beneath you." In Luxemburg's version, "Be not sad, your Lord has made your delivery legitimate." And there are other examples. God's command to a skeptic in Arabic, "Look at your food and drink, look at your ass," becomes, "Look at your condition, look at your overall state." At the end of the world, the earth steps forward in Arabic. In Syriac, the earth splits open. Luxemburg's references to paradise caused great offense. In the Iranian city of Isfahan, there's a 17th century palace built to represent the gates of heaven. The cool greens of the gardens beyond express the longings of a desert people and are beautifully described in the Quran, along with flowing fountains and the favors of houris, usually understood as wide-eyed virgins. One commentary, but not the Quran, even specifies numbers, 72 for each righteous man. But that doesn't sit well with 7 verses of the Quran that promise the righteous eternal contentment with their wives. Luxemburg believes he has resolved this contradiction.
There is one passage in the Quran dealing with the Huris, in which it says, وَزَوَجْنَاهُمْ بِحُورَ عَيْنٍ. We have paired them with dark, wide-eyed maidens. That is the traditional understanding of this verse. If you put the dots on the undotted text a little bit differently, what comes out is, we will make you comfortable under white, crystal clear grapes.
For the suicide bomber, this means a reward of grapes and not of 72 virgins in paradise. But when Muslims feel marginalized and threatened, this dignity and courtesy can give way to an explosive mixture of rage and hatred, impelling spokesmen for a great spiritual and ethical religion to seek approval in the Quran for violent confrontation. And this is happening at a time when more Muslims may be reading and hearing verses from the Quran than ever before. Technologically sophisticated believers can even access the text in its original Arabic or in translation through the new generation of electronic Qurans. But modern technology has also given tremendous power and scope to those determined to impose their own interpretations on the Quran.
We Muslims have been ordered to do brainwashing.
Scores of satellite channels compete for the attention of Muslims across the world.
Equality of women is a bunch of foolishness.
The summit of Islam is jihad.
الله أن يرد كيد الكائدين وأن يدمر اليهود ومن عاونهم من.
Now, of course, the latest technology is the internet, which is a very important platform for the spread of sort of fundamentalist types of religion. It's depressing to see how profoundly a religion's temper can be shaped simply by purely technological developments, but that is one of the things that's happening at the moment.
The internet has become the chosen forum of radicals and extremists. On this site, Mohammed Sadiq Khan posts his own obituary prior to the 7/7 London bombing, in which he played the key role.
We are at war and I'm a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
The full effect of all this propaganda can only be guessed at. But certainly some men and women have changed the way they live their lives according to the Quran. And in a very short time, turning a great city like Cairo into a place that would be unrecognizable to anyone returning here after an absence of only 30 years.
Up until 1974, I had not seen a single veiled woman.
If the veil is worn, it must cover the face and hide the beauty.
But it's not just a question of interpretation. Sometimes there's a selective reading of the text, ignoring, for instance, the firm injunction to forgive any wrongdoer who sincerely repents. Or claiming approval for ancient cultural practices that have no basis in the Quran. But there are verses, particularly those referring to women, which are controversial. And that's the paradox and the challenge of the Quran.
The Quran has two audiences. It has an immediate 7th century patriarchal tribal audience. Then it has the ultimate audience, you and I of this generation, of this age, and whoever comes in the future. So it talks two languages for two sets of people.